A reading from the Gospel according to Luke, chapter 15, verses 1 through 10. Listen for a good word from the Lord. Now all the tax collectors and sinners were coming near to listen to Jesus. And the Pharisees and the scribes were grumbling and saying, "This fellow welcomes sinners and eats with them." So Jesus told them this parable. "Which one of you, having 100 sheep and losing one of them, does not leave the 99 in the wilderness and go after the one that is lost until he finds it? When he has found it, he lays it on his shoulders and rejoices. And when he comes home, he calls together his friends and neighbors, saying to them, 'Rejoice with me, for I have found my sheep that was lost.' So I tell you, there will be more joy in heaven over one sinner who repents than over 99 righteous persons who need no repentance. Or, what woman, having 10 silver coins, if she loses one of them, does not light a lamp, sweep the house, and search carefully until she finds it? When she has found it, she calls together her friends and neighbors, saying, 'Rejoice with me, for I have found the coin that I had lost.' Just so, I tell you, there is joy in the presence of the angels of God over one sinner who repents." This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Have you ever been asked to pet sit? Have you ever been asked to watch someone's pets while they are away on a trip? Well, if you have, then you know it's an important responsibility. You are given charge over a member of the family. You have to ensure they are cared for. You have to remember to feed them and make sure that they have plenty of water. You have to let them out to go take care of their business if you might be pet sitting for a dog, or you have to clean out the litter box if they're a cat, or maybe even the cage if it's a bunny or a bird. The most important thing, and I mean the very baseline for successful pet sitting, is that you have to make sure that the pet is alive and at home when the family returns. Well, a couple of Thursday nights ago, I was gathered with some of the men who live on our street at one of our neighbors' houses. We hadn't been together in a long time, and we were just catching up. And like with any of us, eventually in the conversation, once you've talked about everyone's spouses and how the kids are doing, how our jobs are going, you'll eventually just start telling stories. I don't remember what conversational path we must have been on to lead us to this point, but at some point, one in our group started telling a story about a time that he had been put in charge of another one of our neighbor's animals. Now, I don't know if I would consider them pets, or if that family does, or if they're just something else. They have a dog that they love who is clearly a member of the family. They also have chickens. And specifically, the neighbor was given the responsibility of taking care of the chickens. Well, his responsibility included making sure that they had enough food and water, of course, but he also needed to make sure that the coop was clean. I would admit that the only thing I know about chickens is that they're delicious when prepared the right way. And it seems to me, though, that they could be difficult animals to control. And once they're safely in the coop and locked away, all is good. But if they get out and get on the loose, good luck. They must be craftier than you might think, too, because at some point, when our friend was cleaning the coop of one of the chickens slipped past him and out the door. Our neighbor went to close up everything for the night, and he realized immediately that he was one chicken short. It was late. It was getting dark. And our friend started scrambling. He pulled out the phone that had his light on it, and he started looking around everywhere he could. He looked behind trees and under bushes. He went all the way around the house, wondering if that chicken had in fact tried to cross the road. He looked in the creek behind the house to see if it had somehow taken a misstep and fallen in. He searched and he searched, but to no avail. And eventually he had no choice but to give up the search for the night and go home. Now, our friend assumed the worst. We live in a relatively urban neighborhood, but there is some wildlife around every now and then. You hear of coyote and fox sightings. There are certainly snakes. I actually heard that there was a bear at one point in a neighborhood not too far from ours. And some of these stories might be embellished, but some are certainly true. What we definitely have in our neighborhood, though, are hawks. And as our friend went back home for the night, he prepared to have to give the family the bad news when they came home, that he had failed in his responsibilities, that their chicken was lost. Well, the next day, the friend got up and walked down to the neighbor's house again to take care of the remaining chickens. And when he went around to the backyard where the chicken coop is, much to his surprise, there was the chicken sitting right next to the door of the coop. Somehow it had survived the night and had come home. And can you imagine the joy and amazement our friend felt? What was lost had been found safe and sound. He didn't have to tell the family that they had one less chicken than they did when they left home, and he wasn't out the cost of a new chicken to replace the one that was lost. Well, in chapter 15 of the Gospel of Luke, Jesus seems to be getting into trouble for hanging out with the wrong type of people. He was hanging out with tax collectors, those who had chosen Rome over their own people of Israel. They were taking advantage of their own people as well by upcharging them and their taxes and skimming off of the top, profiting off of an already corrupt and oppressive system. He was hanging out with those whom the Pharisees and the scribes simply called sinners. It was all of those people who didn't live out the letter of the Jewish law like the religious leaders thought they should. They'd fallen short. They didn't measure up to their standard of righteousness. They had sins for which they had not yet repented and gone through the rituals of purification and redemption, so they were considered by them to be unclean. What was worse was that Jesus simply didn't associate with these people. It would have been bad enough, even in the eyes of his critics, if he had simply been seen talking to them, teaching them, doing business with them. In their minds, he did something even worse, though, because he engaged in the intimate act of eating with them. He sat down at a table with them as equals. He broke bread with them in friendship. In their minds, no self-respecting rabbi would do such a thing for fear of becoming ritually unclean himself, or for fear of being seen in the eyes of the community as guilty by associating with those people. But that didn't seem to bother Jesus. In fact, it seems to be at the heart of his mission, bringing people together in God's family. So in response to their complaints, Jesus tells them 3 parables, 2 of which we heard today. He tells them about a shepherd who has 100 sheep but loses one. When he can't find that one, he leaves the 99 and he goes in search of the one that he has lost. And when he finds the lost sheep, he gathers all of his friends and he throws a party. Then he tells them about a woman. The woman has 10 silver coins, but she's lost one of them. It's precious to her. And just one coin might not sound like a lot of money to us, but it could have been a great sum to her, maybe even a full day's wage or even more. When she can't find it, she turns the entire house upside down. She searches under every couch cushion, in every closet, in every drawer. She shines a light in every corner and crack and crevice of the house and between every floorboard. She sweeps up everything that is lying around until she at last finds the precious thing that she has lost. And when she finds it, she too throws an extravagant party. And Jesus wants us to understand that's how God feels about all of God's children. We are all precious in the eyes of God. If we are lost in any sense of the word, then God feels responsible for us, and God seeks us out. God pursues us and will not stop pursuing us until we are found and brought back into relationship with God, until we come home. And when that happens, it is as if there is a party in heaven. There is rejoicing. So come and join the party, Jesus wants to say to the Pharisees and the scribes. The people they kept at arm's length had seen something in Jesus. They had heard something in his message that was drawing them closer to God. The relationship was being restored between them and God, and that was worth celebrating. There are just some people who can't join the party, though, aren't there? You know the kinds of people I'm talking about. They see everyone else having a good time. They can't seem to join in. Or worse, they seek out ways to ruin everyone else's fun. It's as if they feel like if they aren't at the center of the fun, or if everyone else is having fun without them, well, then no one should be having fun at all. Or in this case, it's almost like elementary schoolers on the playground who come home crying because their best friend was playing with someone else instead of them. I remember when it happened to me. One of my best friends when I was in the first grade was a kid named Thomas. Now, Thomas and I went to church together, and we had grown up through the church preschool and kindergarten together. And then we all stayed with other friends of ours at a house of a lady named Miss Judy, who was also a member of our church, and she cared for us in the afternoons while our parents were at work. So Thomas and I played together almost every day. And then we started first grade. Thomas and I weren't in the same class. That was okay, though, because all of the classes in our grade had recess at the same time. And on day one of recess, I immediately found Thomas on the playground, and we started running around and climbing on the equipment and going down the slide and playing tag together, and it was great. There was one day later, though, when our class got out on the playground after Thomas's class was already playing. I found Thomas almost immediately, but I realized he was playing with someone else. That was all well and good, but I had shown up, and I obviously expected Thomas to do what I thought was the right thing, which in my mind meant leaving that other friend behind and starting to play with me and only me. I think I even said to him something like, "Come on, Thomas, it's time for us to play together." I'll never forget the look on Thomas's face. He looked at me, then he looked at his new friend, then he looked back at me with this look that was to say, "Are you crazy? We're having a good time. I'm not going to stop what I'm doing just because you think I should only play with you. So you have a choice. You can join in the fun with us, and we can all be friends together, or you can go off and pout. But I'm not going to stop making new friends just because you and I have been friends for so long." There are some people who just can't stand it when Jesus is having fun and eating and partying with those that they consider to be the wrong people. They feel Jesus would only associate with people who think like them, who act like them, who believe like them. But Jesus is constantly trying to show us that with God, no one fits this wrong kind of people category. We're all children of God, and when we are lost or feel lost, no matter how lost and no matter what the circumstances or actions were that caused us to be lost, God searches us out. And Jesus showed us that this is what the church is supposed to be about too. Instead of criticizing, Jesus wished that they could have been rejoicing with them and with all of heaven. They should have been throwing a party for what was taking place. The ones the Pharisees wanted nothing to do with had found the face of God in Jesus. They were being reunited with the family of God, and it was time to throw a party. But the fact that the Pharisees couldn't showed that it wasn't just the tax collectors and sinners who were lost. The Pharisees, who had lived as righteous a life by their standards as possible to that point, but who couldn't rejoice at this reunion, they were just as lost as anyone. I'm a dog person. I don't honestly believe that the world is only divided up into two kinds of people, dog people and cat people. But if I had to choose, I'm a dog person. There's nothing wrong with cats at all. I just prefer dogs. But I have loved one cat in my life. My dad was serving as the pastor of a church in the Atlanta area when I was in middle school, and there was a stray cat that was hanging around the church campus. Now, every now and then, the church staff team would care for it, but it needed a good home. So one day, my dad's administrative assistant looked at him with that look that people use when they're trying to manipulate you by using animals. She said, "Don't you think that your kids need a cat?" I have no idea how it worked, but that cat came home, and he became ours. And that cat and I just got each other. When I was a teenager, he was as surly and as self-centered as I was. I'd be down in the basement of our house watching television, trying to get away from the rest of the family, and he would just come and lie on my chest for hours. I love that cat. He stayed in an unfinished room in the basement of our house. It had sheetrock walls, but a concrete floor and an unfinished ceiling. It certainly wasn't a palace by any standards, but he had more room to roam around in that room than if he had been staying in a crate. We went on vacation for the weekend one time, and he was almost always able to care for himself on those short trips. Give him enough food and water and a clean litter box for the weekend, and he's good. But when we came home, My dad went down to the basement to let the cat out. He opened the door, but the cat was nowhere to be found. He was gone. Now, workers had come to the house that weekend. It was the only time they could get there to do their work. The best my dad could guess was that one of the workers had opened that door by mistake and the cat had gotten out. So we searched throughout the entire house, but he wasn't anywhere to be found. And we feared he must not have only gotten out of the basement, but he must have slipped out of the door when the workers weren't looking, and he was gone. And we searched. We hoped and prayed that he would come home. We mourned. About a week later, my dad went down to that basement room. He was either looking for something or maybe he was going to start cleaning out all of the cat's old things, when all of a sudden he heard a sound, some sort of rustling. He looked all around the room, and finally he looked toward the unfinished ceiling where the sheetrock ended and exposed the framing above, and staring back down at him was our cat. In fact, it was something like the workers had gotten into that room, but it had scared him so much to have strangers in the house that he had somehow climbed up to the exposed ceiling and had hidden for safety. He was so scared and stuck that he couldn't get back down until my dad helped him. He'd been there the whole time, but we thought we'd lost him. So imagine the shock and rejoicing when we held him again. They say that not all who wander are lost. We might also be able to say that not all who stay home are found. One of the most famous and widely known hymns of the faith is Amazing Grace. And the first stanza in particular speaks at least to part of the sentiment of these parables of Jesus, that I was once lost, but now am found, was blind, but now I see. It's the song of every person who has felt the grace of God at work in their life to bring them into reunion with God and back into God's family. And in many ways, it's the story of every faithful believer. There's just one problem. Just because we are found once, and just because we are forgiven by grace, and just because we are redeemed, doesn't mean we will never be lost again. In fact, being lost and found throughout life is part of what it means to be a human in relationship with God. Lostness comes in many forms. We can be lost and not even realize it. We can be wandering around as if we're in a strange land when we think we've stayed at home the whole time. Or we can be with the same people, family, friends, church, and yet somehow we lose our sense of belonging. Something happens and we lose our once clear sense of God's presence with us. Crisis overcomes us. Illness overtakes us. Death shakes us. Change overwhelms us. And we just feel lost. Sometimes, even like the Pharisees and the scribes in the passage today, we forget that we all get lost from time to time. And we even get lost in our certainty about the way that God works. We become so certain, so dogmatic in our faith, so sure of what is right and wrong and who is in and who is out, that instead of joining Jesus in the work of expanding the boundaries of God's family so that everyone can know that they are welcomed and have a seat at the table, we instead sit in judgment of others, thinking that unless they become exactly like us, they'll never have a place in God's family. But everyone is precious in God's sight. Isn't that what Jesus wants to say? Every lost lamb, every lost coin, every tax collector and sinner, and every self-righteous Pharisee and scribe is precious to God. And the good news is that God searches for us over and over again in all of our forms of lostness. God finds us, embraces us, and leads us back home. Even more than that, God invites us as the church to be a people with whom everyone can find a home. God invites us to join in the rejoicing that is taking place in both heaven and earth. There's a memorial in Pennsylvania for those who were lost in the crash of Flight 93 on the morning of September 11th, 2001. Like all memorials, it's a place to gather and remember. And at the memorial, there is a structure that they call the Tower of Voices. Apparently it was installed on September 10th, 2020, and contains a system of 40 wind chimes, one for each passenger and crew member on the flight. The chimes ring out every time the wind blows, and on a windy day, it is said to be heavenly. Even in that place of solemn remembrance, the bells can ring out with a sense of joy. Because even when we feel like all is lost, God is continuing to breathe God's Spirit upon the world. And the wind of God's creative and restorative power continues to blow. Each week in our congregation, we say the Lord's Prayer. And we come to that line where it says, "Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven." Well, Jesus comes giving us a glimpse of what life in God's heavenly kingdom is like, to show us how to make earth look like heaven. And N.T. Wright says that if we hope to be in tune with God's reality, then we must understand that the two halves of God's creation, heaven and earth, were meant to fit together and be in harmony with each other. He says if you discover what's going on in heaven, you'll discover how things were meant to be on earth. He says if earth dwellers wanted to copy the life of heaven, well, then they'd better have a party too, because that's what Jesus was doing. Rejoice with me, Jesus might say. Join the party. What was lost has been found. Amen.